Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here tonight. This is one of my favorite trainings to give, and I think it's one of the most important because it's talking about storytelling. And really, the best elected officials, the best public servants are storytellers. And the reasons that we tell stories is that voters vote for people they like and trust. They vote for people they like and trust. I'll say that again. So I think one of the most important polls that comes out in presidential elections is the poll about who people want to go have a beer with. Because that shows that they like this person, they trust this person. They might not agree with everything the person does, but they see them as a real person. And so your voters come with their experience and values. And you come to the table with your experience and values. And the key of how to link those is what we do through stories. So stories build those bridges. And also voters remember how you made them feel. They don't remember a fact you said. They don't remember your 10-point platform on how to address crime in your city. What they're going to remember is how you made them feel. And you elicit feelings through storytelling. You think about it, we read books, we watch TV, we go to the movies, we hang out with friends and talk, and it's all because storytelling is something that people like to do, and it elicits feelings. And finally, it also shows your authentic self. Every single one of you that is on this web clinic tonight brings a unique set of skills, a unique set of passions, and a unique network to the table to create change for your own community. And the way you talk about that is through storytelling that makes you authentic. Because any politician, any candidate, anywhere in this country could stand up and say, I care about the economy, the environment, and public safety. Regardless of your background, your vision, your party, your experience, you can list your top 3 issues. But that's not memorable. And so to be memorable, to connect with voters, to get them to trust you, we have to use stories. Brings out your authentic self. And so what I want everyone to do is we can say, just tell stories. But what I want you to do right now is to pull up a side screen or get out a pen and a paper. I want you to all actually type or write. I'm not in a room with you, so I can't hold you accountable like I would if I was in person. But I want you to type or write answers to these questions. I'm going to go through these questions and just write down the first thing that comes to mind. There's no right or wrong answer. If nothing comes to mind, don't worry about it. Just wait for the next question and think about as many details as you can. So the first one is, what's the single moment that has brought you here today? It's a lovely summer evening and you're spending it indoors watching me. What was that moment? Who were you talking to? What were your feelings? And not just to this web clinic, but to this point where you're thinking of running for office. What was that single moment that brought you here today? I'm giving you time because I'm trusting you all that you're actually writing this down. And then tell me about a story that from your childhood that shaped you as an adult. So one of my favorite stories I use all the time is that growing up, every single night, my family would say our nightly prayers before dinner. And for 7 years, I had the same exact prayer, that God would make more waterfalls and end homelessness. And to this day, some of my top policy priorities are affordable housing and environmental work. So what's your story from your childhood that shaped you as an adult? And just jot down notes. You don't have to write the whole story. The next is, when have you overcome a fear? What was something scary you did and you overcame a fear? Last summer, my kids wanted to go down an alpine slide, and I fell off when I was little. So for the first time in 30 years, I rode an alpine slide. Could be something serious or something funny. When have you overcome a fear? And then the next piece is, when have you helped someone else overcome a fear? What did that look like? What did you do to help them overcome their fear? How were you there to support them? What are the details of that? Now, I want you to write down a time where you tried to help someone else. Were you successful? Were you unsuccessful? Was it hard? What were the barriers that stood in your way to helping someone else? How did it make you feel helping someone else, whether you were successful or not? And now I want you to think about someone that has inspired you. And I don't want this to just be some president at some point in time, but who were they? What did they say that inspired you? What happened? Where were you? Why were you inspired? How did it make you feel when you were inspired? Be specific. And then the next one is, name a time that you inspired someone. You are all leaders. I know from being part of our network and wanting to give back to your community. When did you inspire someone? What did you do to do that? When did you realize you inspired them? It might have been years later that you realized that you planted a seed that inspired someone. Name a time that you inspired someone else. And then we're all here tonight because we believe in leadership and giving back to our communities. So what's a value you have about leadership? But more importantly, when have you exhibited that value? It might be listening. It might be integrity. It might be collaboration. What is something you value in leadership? And when was a time, a specific time, not just a project, but when was a specific time you personally exhibited that value that you admire? All right, we have one more slide about this. What's a specific issue you feel passionate about? But when exactly did you realize this was an important issue? And what happened to make it important to you? You didn't just wake up one day and care about affordable housing or the environment or gun laws or public safety. What's an issue you feel passionate about? And when was that moment? What happened? What were you participating in that made you realize that that issue was important? And now I want you to tell me about a time you cried. Could be happy tears, sad tears. Me, I cry when I'm angry, which frustrates me because then I don't seem angry. But tell me about a time you cried. And then tell me about a time you laughed. What was the last time you laughed so hard that your stomach hurt? Or that you laughed so hard you cried? Tell me about a time you laughed. Who made you laugh? What was the circumstances? Think about a time you laughed. All right. So hopefully that gives you some stories to start with, some stories to tell. And eventually you can build your stories into a stump speech. You can build your stories into your campaign literature, into your fundraising ask, into your door wrap. And the reason that we need these stories is because we have to show people and not tell people. And so I want to give you an example. I could say, my name is Faith Winter. I'm running for Senate District 24 because I care about affordable housing and I care about the environment. Or I can tell you a story. It's 104 degrees out. It's hot. I'm in my little red ant car. It's a little Toyota Tercel. And we have the windows down, but the air inside is stifling. And I'm driving to Walmart. And the reason I'm driving to Walmart is because my client, it works there. And her 3-year-old son is in the back seat of the car. And I drop them off and I have a pit in my gut. And I say goodbye and I'm crying. And she goes into work and her 3-year-old son hid in the dressing room that day while she worked. And the reason I had to do that is I worked at a homeless shelter. And she could only stay at my homeless shelter for 3 months and I had failed. One of my jobs was to find single moms a place to live. And I would go from landlord to landlord to landlord and ask over and over again if they could live there. They'd pay their rent on time. They'd be drug-free. They'd be responsible. And I heard no over and over again. And that was the day I decided to become a community organizer to change the system instead of work at a place that's a very temporary Band-Aid to a broken system. So I could have sat here and told you, I care about affordable housing. I believe in organizing. I'm compassionate. But that's just a list that's unmemorable. You would leave tomorrow and not ever remember what Faith Winter actually cared about. But because I told you a story, and hopefully a story that made you feel something, you're going to know I'm an organizer and why I made that decision. You're going to know I'm hardworking, that I went from landlord to landlord and I kept asking and I kept trying. And you're going to know I care about affordable housing. And so that's the power of stories. So my number one rule in your stump speech when you're talking is don't make lists. Don't ever list. My first stump speech I gave when I first ran for city council had my 3 qualifications, the 3 issues I wanted to work on, and the 3 things I was going to do for the city. It was very nice and neat. 3 of them. It was so boring. It was like a 3-minute long list. So don't just list your qualifications. Resumes are boring. Don't list issues. Don't list qualifications. Use your stories to show the voters who you are, not tell the voters. You can tell the voters you're hardworking. You can tell them you're a good listener. You can tell them you have integrity. But a story is going to make them remember that and believe it. And so that's why we need to use stories. But it can't just be all about me all day, right? So you just wrote all those stories down and I'm sure they're fantastic stories of overcoming a hard time, of courage, of funny times, of hard work. But ultimately, people vote for their self-interest as well. And we are running because we want to give back to our community and make it a better spot. So you have your story and you're showing voters who you are in an authentic way. And now we have to move that story from the me to the we. And so in my story about affordable housing, I can talk about how there's children in our schools that don't know where they're going to sleep that night. And they're more worried about where they're going to sleep than what's in their backpack. Right? That's a short story about my community, but connects my values and my vision to the values and vision of my community. So when you're thinking about moving your story from the me to the we, you want to make it connected, right? You want to connect with folks. You want to make it compelling. And if there's a challenge and a choice, those are the best stories. Those are stories we pay money to go see on the big screen. Is what was the challenge you had and the choice you had to make in that moment or that time? And the opportunity is our vision. What's our vision for our community that we have? And so you move your stories that you wrote down earlier and what they show, and they show about your leadership, and you move it from the me to the we. And so you tell your story, people are connected, they love you, they think you're amazing, that you're courageous, that you're a good listener, that you have integrity. You move it from the me to the we, and they're like, yes, we can do this in our community. And then you motivate them to action. And you do the ask and you do the pitch, right? You might be asking for a donation or a vote or a support or a yard sign, but you're empowering them to be part of your story, to be part of our bigger story. You're building a team. You're showing that this isn't just about you. It's not about you asking for this title, but it's actually about all of us. You're showing them that they themselves have individual impact, that their vote, their donation is going to have impact. And then you have to add urgency to it, that they should donate today, not next week, that they should vote for you this year, that they should fill out their ballot, because there is urgency in our community to solve these problems. So you tell your story, you go from the me to the we, and you motivate them to action with a specific ask. And then you have to pick the right stories to tell. And so what I want you to do is think about the two things, either words or short phrases, that you want the voters to remember about you. And so I tell stories. I want the voters to know I'm hardworking and that I get things done. So no matter what story I tell, I try to have it show those two things because that's my message. And so there's politicians that pander where they completely change their message if they go to the Chamber of Commerce versus the League of Women Voters. But if I use different stories based on my audience for the Chamber of Commerce and the League of Women Voters, but they both show the same message of being hardworking and getting things done, I'm being consistent, I'm being authentic, I'm not pandering, but I'm starting with where people are at. So you want to think about who your audience is, where they're at, where they're starting from. You want to make it timely, right? So everyone is talking about healthcare right now, regardless of what side you're on the healthcare debate. Everyone's talking about healthcare. And so it would be timely to tell a healthcare story in a stump speech or at the door. It's urgent. It's universal. You want to tell stories that the me to we is easy, that it's a universal experience. It's a shared story that we have. As I said, you think about the audience, right? Is it the chamber? Is it the League of Women Voters? Is it a mixed audience? Is it a group of environmentalists? Is it the realtors? And then the truth doesn't set you free. A lot of times we think if we just tell the voters this one fact, they're going to believe us. But the truth is that in politics right now, it's polarized, and there's been a lot of studies that show when you hear a fact that doesn't fit your political view, you don't believe it. And so facts are important, but it's those shared values and those shared connections that we get through stories that actually start opening the door to have conversations with people that aren't your base, with new people, new voters, and new supporters. So that's the power of stories, why we do it. If you remember everything from this first part, I want you to remember that your job as a storyteller is to show, not tell. So don't ever let me catch you in a stump speech making a list. Show the voters what you want them to know. Don't tell them through your stories. Connect on shared values and make an urgent pitch that brings people to your team and your action because they're excited because you did a fantastic me to we. That's what a good stump speech is. That's what a good door knock is. It's what a good mail piece is your story that connects. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a woman running. And we have some tips and things to think about and talk about that Celinda Lake did. So Celinda Lake is one of the leading pollsters on women in politics. And this is new research out just from the spring. So it's post the last election because this goes back to how we position ourselves, what we talk about, and the stories we choose to share. And she compared what voters think about women candidates to male candidates. And what she found is that voters do express concern about the ability of women to balance competing priorities, the priorities of home and priorities of running. And shockingly, our male candidates don't have those concerns. But she also found that it's important for women candidates, no matter their family situation, to talk to the voters about their personal lives. So I have 2 children. They are amazing. Tobin and Sienna, he's 8, she's 6. And I tell stories about them all the time, about their schools. When I talk about school funding, I talk about how their school floods every single year, and my kids are missing time in the classroom because we can't fund our schools. And then I talk about our whole state and how it's just not my kids and my school, but it's everywhere. So it's important for women to talk about their family situation. It is also harder for women to recover from critiques. So if you're being critiqued on being snobbish or shrill or uninformed, it's harder for us to recover, but we can, and especially when we open up about who we are. The age of children matter. They tend to worry more about women who have young children versus older children, but that doesn't mean if you have young children, you shouldn't run. I've had 2 children in office, but the age of children matter. They will raise questions about the role of mother, so be open and honest about your role of mother. And then voters, on the other hand, worry that single women don't understand families' concerns. So they're worried if you are a mother, how are you going to handle it and work on both sides? But if you're not, then they're like, well, you don't understand what families go through. So let's talk about some of the things that we can do to address these voters' concerns through our storytelling. So make it about the voters. Show how your experiences contribute to the work on behalf of voters. So that's the me to we, right? So we have our stories and people are concerned about whether we know what families are going through or that we can handle our own family, but show how your experience relates to them and their personal lives. Be matter of fact. Share details and avoid negative framing. And so what she means by that is, I talk about when people ask me, oh my God, how do you do this? How are you a mom and do this? I talk about how my dad lives with me and he helps parents, but I make sure that I am always there to help with homework. That's a detail that's memorable, and they'll get that without saying, yeah, it's such a bummer, I never see my kids, or I wish I could see my kids more. That might be true, it's true for me, but you don't want to have that negative framing. So give specific examples, be matter of fact, and frame it positively. And then again, from the me to we, be confident and acknowledge that all working families strive to manage children at work, right? This is not unique to you. It's not unique to your situation. And that's something that we have to do. And you have to strike the right balance, right? Don't overshare, right? Give 1 or 2 examples about how you manage it, but don't give your whole life's detail and the calendar on your fridge about how you're managing every field trip. Acknowledge your support system. That's really important. Understand perceptions of wealth though, right? If you have a nanny, if you have an au pair, that's going to impact how voters are seeing you and how they see you relating. Show, don't tell. We already talked about that. But don't say, oh, I'm there for my kids, don't worry. Show them through a story, right? That last week I was doing a science experiment with my son, and we ended up burning something, right? Like, show, don't tell. Be real. Talk about the value. Voters love when you talk about the value of chores. It pulled really high. So they love when you talk about chores, but like being real about your family. And then for non-parents, we talked about how sometimes voters are worried that non-parents, the view is that, well, you don't understand what families go through. But that goes down significantly if you give credit to families and their work, right? If you give credit and acknowledge. I'm sorry, my dogs are barking in the background. But give credit to families. Talk about your interaction with families, interaction in your neighborhood, interaction in your family. And then divorce, lesbian, and dating women. Voters' views have rapidly evolved on this. It's getting much more liberal. And so generally they are very open and they do not see it as a hindrance for single, divorced, or lesbian women, but they don't really want to hear about your dating life. This is a part where they don't really want to know the details. So those are some tips for your storytelling for women specifically on concerns that voters have about women running. But the good news is that voters relate to women better. I think we are good storytellers, and all those concerns we can address through our storytelling. So that's the good news. And so now, hopefully, I've given you some good stories from the beginning of the session. You know how to show, not tell. You're not going to list your resume. You're going to go from me to we. You're going to have a great ask. You're going to talk about your family or not your family or your life in a way that addresses voters' concerns. So now you're on the campaign trail, you're messaging, you have your speech, you're doing great. And now you are either elected or you're negotiating on the campaign trail. And negotiating is one of the biggest things that women say they have concerns about once they get there or along the campaign trail. So we just wanted to take the time today to give you some negotiating tips to take home with you. Right? And so women, this is something we're really good at. Do your homework. And I think it's really important to research a topic and think through your options before you go into the discussion, right? So for example, I run the paid family leave bill in Colorado. Those are some pretty intense negotiations. We haven't been successful yet, but we will eventually. But I know that there's several different ways to fund this. We could fund this from an all-employee paid, an employer paid, a mixture. There's options to have private sector do it by choice. There's tax incentives to have the private sector do it. There's a lot of options. But before I go into a negotiation, I know what those are. Try to see the situation from all angles. Understand where the other person is coming from. And try asking them to tell you about their needs and concerns. Because if you know their needs and concerns and you know your options, you are in the powerful position of connecting different options that are acceptable to you that meet their needs. Define your goals. Know what your line in the sand is. Know what your coalition's line in the sand is, the other people that you are working with, and when you will walk away. Determine the best timing for discussion. You'll want enough time for the discussion when it's not. So legislative session, probably the worst negotiations happen at 11 o'clock at night in the last week of session, right? I would rather be doing it over a lunch in the first week of session if I can control it. On the campaign, if you are negotiating, right, when probably 10 o'clock at night after you've been door knocking, fundraising, canvassing all day, not the best time. Remain calm. And then the most important thing is to listen, and listen some more. Because it's by listening that you will hear their stories. So we've talked about the importance of our stories, but hearing their stories is super important because that gives us a view of where they're coming from, where they're headed, what their bottom lines are. And if you listen, you're going to come back to the table next time and be able to offer something. And by listening, you're going to find those shared values where if they're talking about hard work or they're talking about people that might be scamming the system, you can share those values and those concerns as well if you listen. So some of the things you should ask yourself before entering a negotiation. So who's the best messenger? And it's not always you. So for example, on paid family leave, I oftentimes send business owners that agree with me to negotiations. I'm not a lawyer, and some of you are probably lawyers on here, and you're going to understand the ins and outs of employment law much better than I am. That's your background. And so perhaps I need a lawyer with me, my business person. So who's the best messenger? And then there's a decision to make in negotiations between different sides. Do you want to do shuttle diplomacy? Are you the trusted voice, especially as the candidate or the elected official? Are you the trusted voice that both sides would talk to? And maybe you want to do shuttle diplomacy where you go to one side and you get their bottom line and their shared values, and you go to the other side and you get their bottom line and shared values and make suggestions and go back and forth because you're the trusted one. And if they were actually in the same room, it would blow up. Or perhaps it's a roundtable situation where you actually have everyone in the room and you're putting all the concerns on paper, and you're putting all the ideas on paper, and you're managing that conversation. Plan for impasse. It's going to happen. And impasse doesn't mean the end. Impasse is often in the middle, but what do you do? How do you make both sides feel involved? How do you continue on past impasse? How do you get people back to the table? How do people trust you? So plan for impasse in the situation. And along with that, right, I said impasse doesn't mean you're at the end oftentimes. Timeouts work. Timeouts allow people both to be self-reflective of what they wanted, what they said, how they were, but also to go back to their members, to their coalition, to the people that they're representing care about. So use timeouts, parrot back the concerns. So if someone is saying, I am just really worried that this is going to kill small businesses, that this is going to shut them down, parrot back that concern to show them that you are hearing them and that you hear them in a real and authentic way. Ease fears. Change is scary, and if you're negotiating on something, you're probably negotiating on something that's a big change. So ease fears. On one bill I worked on, I actually had legislators from a state that had passed a similar bill call legislators in my state to ease their fears. I wasn't the best messenger, but I listened to their concerns. I parroted back their concerns, and I figured out the best messenger to ease their fears. Show the other side how their needs will be met. Everyone comes to the table with needs. There's a lot of ways to meet those needs. So figure that out. And this is the hardest one for me, but be okay with being uncomfortable. Negotiations are uncomfortable. Be okay with that. Know when to walk away. And then in your coalition, in your community, in your family, whoever you're negotiating with, decide how to divide and conquer. Sometimes it's good to have a good cop, bad cop. Sometimes it's have some round table and some shuttle diplomacy. So know who's on your team and elevate the skills and the needs of everyone on your team, and you're going to be more successful. So the two most important tools, which I've already said, is always start with shared values. And this brings us back to that storytelling. If you listen to their stories, and I would ask the people you're negotiating with to share stories, right? Not just facts. Be like, I would love to hear the stories of your members about how this will impact them. Because then you can have your shared values and revisit those values as often as possible. And then listen, because that's going to give you more power than anything else. If you truly understand their fears, their hopes, their bottom lines, it's going to give you the ability to be the one at the table that meets everyone's needs. And then dealing with conflict. So we've talked about storytelling, we've talked about the power of storytelling, we've talked about negotiation, but there's still conflict. And oftentimes we talk about women are like, I want to run, but I know they're going to say nasty things about me. They're going to send out ugly mailers. There's going to be ads against me. There's going to be TV ads against me. There's going to be mean letters to the editor. So how, as a candidate, do you react to that conflict? And do you avoid it? Do you lean into it? Do you react to it? We're going to go through some tips on how women candidates should be dealing with conflict on the campaign trail. So women have a double standard, unfortunately, on the campaign trail. We've talked about here at Vote, Run, Lead. I'm sure it won't be a shock to you, but women have a double standard of needing to be tough as nails and warm as toast, as author Ann Quindlen says, right? People want us to be tough, but they don't want us to be too tough because we're still women. They want us to be warm. So we have to be likable and qualified. And if you are too hard, women are called shrill, bossy, and worse with too much conflict, right? We've all been seeing women be called that. But if you're too soft on the other side, you're called meek, shy, and weak, and that you're not showing up enough. So it's a hard balance, and it's going to be different for every single one on this web clinic as well, because you also want to be authentic in that. But don't entirely avoid conflict. Conflict can be good, and it can actually help you on the campaign trail and endear voters to you. So the first and most important thing is to respond immediately. So if there is something out there that is not true, or there's conflict, or people want to know where you are on an issue, respond immediately, because if you ignore it, it's just going to snowball and get worse, and the lack of response is then going to become the story. And voters actually really like when women stand up for themselves and then move on, right? They respond to the conflict. If you're in a forum and they call you out on something, respond to it and move on. Respond and move on. And then voters really like when women come in defense of others. They love the mama bear aspect of women in office. And so feel free to lean into conflict when it's on behalf of your community. Is there a developer coming in ruining your community? Deal with that conflict head on. When our schools are underfunded and there's conflict around that, and you get to say, I'm standing up for teachers and kids, voters like when women come in defense of others and deal with conflict. So those are some ways for women to deal with conflict on the campaign trail. And oftentimes it doesn't have to be bad, because if you respond immediately and move on, and you play that mama bear role, voters actually showed an appreciation and more likability of women candidates when they did that. And then with conflict, but scary, right? One, conflict isn't inherently something we walk into. Also, society very much teaches women to avoid conflict. So one of my best mentors in the world, when I first started running for office, she said, in this line of work, if you need unconditional love, get a dog. Because in this job, if you aren't making someone angry, you aren't doing anything. And so it's important to know that in this job, conflict is part of the job. It might be uncomfortable, but it's really what we're stepping up to do, and we shouldn't avoid it, and we should be prepared for it, which hopefully we're giving you the tips to be prepared for that conflict. And also, it's not your responsibility to make other people feel comfortable, right? If you're negotiating, if you're dealing with conflict, you don't have to make everyone in the room comfortable. That's not your job. And generally, I found that all uncomfortable conversations are usually worth it. The ones that I have a pit in the gut of my stomach and I'm nervous and I don't know how it's going to come out and I don't know what to say, but I know it's important to have. Usually you come out as a stronger leader, you come out more authentic, and you come out in a way that you can position yourselves with voters, showing that, one, you didn't avoid conflict, but you actually came out as a stronger candidate and most likely a stronger community. And women leaders should be leading in a way that they're tough and they're standing up to bullies. We mentioned this a little bit, but voters are really looking for that right now, and it's a really comfortable way for women to deal with and stand up and be part of conflict. And so I think it's important to know that on the campaign trails, there is conflict. It doesn't mean it's bad, and it can actually be helpful for your campaign. So that is what I had for today with the power of story, conflict, and negotiations. I hope that was helpful. This, of course, will be on a replay. Then you can watch it again. Or my email is faith@vote-run-lead if you have questions. And I encourage you, you've all been here. If you aren't already on our alumni Facebook page, please join our alumni Facebook page because you are all alums. Erin and I both check out the alumni Facebook page daily and respond to different questions and different things that can come up. So if you are saying there's this conflict on the campaign trail, what were those tips again on how women should react? You can look up or do that there. So please join our Facebook page because we want to keep you moving forward and keep you successful.